everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Razer-50 by Mach1 Rocketry. This is a fiberglass model kit, so this is kind of a step up from the typical balsa wood and cardboard types of kits. And if you want to get into fiberglass rockets, maybe eventually for mid-power or high power, this is a good place to start and get some of the basics down. Now, if you've built other rockets before, and I do encourage you to do so before building this kit, the kit itself is going to go together much like any other paper and cardboard rocket, except that instead of using white glue and wood glue for most of the joints, we're going to be using epoxy and gel type super glue. So make sure you have some of those on hand. If you don't have a lot of different epoxies, I recommend getting a 15-minute epoxy. That's kind of a good compromise between speed and strength. Let's go ahead and open this up. Now be careful when handling fiberglass. The smooth parts that are finished are usually safe to handle. However, the edges often have little free bits of glass sticking out of them, and those can end up in your fingers and cause irritation at the very least. Okay, so in this package here is the main body tube. Okay. It is a pre-slotted airframe, so the fins do have fin tabs, and this will give us a really nice, straight and strong type of joint. Inside the small parts package, we have the engine mount and the centering rings. Now these aren't attached, they're just on there by friction. This is a thrust ring, 3 fins. Alright, and then we have a chute protector, and they actually sent us an extra one. It probably got caught there. You only need one of these. And then a 9-inch nylon parachute. Inside the smaller small parts bag, you have a choice of using either micro rail buttons and or a launch lug. I'm going to build this using the launch lug because I do not own a micro rail. Alright, we've got a Kevlar shock cord, a plastic nose cone, and then finally the engine clip. Now, Mach1 has kind of a strange business model in that you can buy the kit with just the parts, and then if you want an instruction manual, that's an extra about $6, and if you want the decals, that's also extra. I don't remember what it was for this kit. I do have the decals for it, but I decided against spending $6 on instructions. And unfortunately, they don't even allow you to download the instructions from their website. As I said, it's a little bit strange. Okay, so normally at the beginning of my videos, you always see a disclaimer saying, read the instructions. Well, in this case, the video is the instructions. I'm going to go ahead and clear this away. One of the things we need to do next is to wash all of the fiberglass. And so you can either do this by making a solution of half water and half rubbing alcohol, the 70% type, and then adding a couple of drops of dishwashing liquid to that, and then you can just spray that in and inside. Don't forget to do the insides here, and then wipe that off. Or you can simply fill your sink with some water and dishwashing liquid and wash these like you would the dishes. And again, make sure you wash both inside and out. The reason for this is that there may be some residual oils on the fiberglass parts from the molding process. Okay, so I'm going to go do that now off camera, and then I'll come back. I have all of the fiberglass washed, and now I'm going to put on a launch lug line here. So I'm just going to choose a point between two of the fin slots and just kind of freehand mark that. Okay, and then You can use a door frame or a drawer edge or a tube marking guide like this one, and go ahead and just draw a line about 2/3 of the way up the tube. Alright, now since I don't have any written instructions for this, I'm just going to place my launch lug at 1/3 of the distance from the aft end. So this is 18 inches long, or a little over 45 centimeters. So that's going to put our launch lug at about 15 centimeters, or about 6 inches, whichever you prefer. Alright, so I'm just going to measure that first of all. My line's really kind of hard to show up under this light. Alright, there's that. And then the launch lug itself is 2 inches long, or about 5.1 centimeters. So I'm going to mark that up here as well. Okay, so the distance between those two, this space here is where the launch lug will go. If you're going to use the micro launch rail lugs, then you can pretty much put them in about the same spot. Or you can put one, in fact this would be better, is put one of your launch rail lugs down at the aft end and put the other one about 1/3 of the way up here. Alright, so now I'm going to put on some gloves quickly. And what we're going to do here is just lightly scratch the surfaces of the fiberglass where epoxy is going to come in contact with it. And this will just give it a better bonding surface. Okay, and just about anything between 60 grit and 150 grit is fine. I'm using 150. And so first of all, I'm going to get right around the fin slots. Okay, you can go a little bit beyond them here. Okay, and then I'll also do the region where my launch lug is going to be. Alright, and then on my fins, I'm going to go ahead and the actual root edge here is already kind of rough from the cutting process, but you can go ahead and sand that. And then sand right along the edges of the root edge going up onto the fin here. And this will be the area that will be covered by the epoxy fillets. Alright, now you can also do this to the motor mount tube for the centering rings, but wait until we get further along here and decide where the centering rings are going to go. Okay, now you can shape these fins if you like, just like you would a balsa fin, though it's going to take a lot more effort to sand an airframe into here, or excuse me, not an airframe, an airfoil. But I will just go ahead and knock down the corners a little bit, just so it's not sharp edged. Okay, and then it's a good idea to go ahead and wipe these off with a rag or a paper towel moistened with water or alcohol. I'm going to do that off camera and then come back and we'll start in on the motor mount. So the first part of our actual construction will be the assembly of the motor mount. Now in some of their kits the motor mount tube is pre-slotted for the engine clip. This one is not, so we'll have to make our own. And so first of all we're going to need to make a mark at 6.5 centimeters from the aft end. And I'm just going to pick an end here and call it aft, whichever one seems to be in the best condition. So I'll just write aft on there. Okay, and so now I'm just going to measure from the aft end 6.5 centimeters. Make a little mark there. Okay, and now for this you're going to need a small file. Okay, and then just take that file and we're going to file this through here. Okay, and basically you just need to get through the outer coating of this. And once you get down with a little bit of depth, you should be able to cut through here. Looks like I need some more. Alright, so if you really have to force the knife, you need more filing. There we go. Alright, so just cut a notch there about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch wide, and then the engine clip will just poke in through there. Okay, looks like I need to widen it just a little bit there. There we go. Okay, now dry fitting on the centering rings, the one with the notches in it, goes on first. And it looks like those notches need to be extended just a little bit. So once again we can use a file for this, and a square cross-section file works the best. And we're just going to widen one of those notches. There we go. And so that's going to slide over. And this is going to go down about this far. Okay. I'm going to put the other one on here so we can do some test fitting. Alright, so this is just going to go down to here. We are going to need to put some notches in this one as well. And we may just flip these around here in a minute. Alright, but if we compare this, okay, we want the centering rings on either side of the slots here, so this end to this end. So if I dry fit this up, okay, at least to there, and in order to get enough clearance for our engine clip, we're going to want the aft end to stick out here about 1 centimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that back out. Now I got the ring stuck. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the ring back off there. And I'm going to measure 1 centimeter. Alright, so that's going to be my overhang amount there. Okay. Now with this one, the one that's got the 2 notches in it, if we make this the forward ring, then we can tie in the shock cord to that other notch. So to do that, we're going to have to take and make a notch in the other ring, and this will become our aft ring. Okay, so we'll pull that off there. Put this one back on. Okay, going to need a little more. Okay, it's deep enough, but it's not wide enough. I need to cut over a little bit. There we go. Alright, so I'm just going to put that right about there for the moment. And what I can do here, actually before I put that on, is make another mark. So now if I put my engine mount flush there, okay, so I'm going to have, I'm trying to align the slot here. Okay, so I'm going to want one ring about there, and the other ring in the front about there. Alright, now before we put this all together, we also need to work on the shock cord a little bit here. So the Kevlar tends to unravel really easily, and so to prevent that from happening, I'm going to take a little bit of super glue here and just let that soak into the end. We're going to do this with both ends. Okay, and then I'm just going to wipe off the excess. Alright, and then we'll cut off the frayed part here. And that should leave a little bit of an end there that's still super glued together. Okay, so one end of this is going to go in here. Okay, so we want that to go basically right at the top of the clip there. Alright, and that other hole we can use to put the Kevlar through. And it actually may be easier to do it this way, where I'm going to put it through the ring, hold it up into the notch there, and put this on like that. Alright, and then we're going to wrap the Kevlar around like this. Okay, now, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking this may change our available length a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to glue this one together first, and then we'll do the aftering in case we have to adjust things. Alright, so for that we're going to make up some epoxy, and since this should be a pretty quick job, I'm going to use 5-minute. But if you don't have 5-minute epoxy, just use whatever you have. These little trays are called weighing boats, and you can buy these from scientific supply companies. You can also get them online at places like Amazon. They're meant for weighing out chemicals and such. They also work well for making epoxy in small batches. Alright, so what I'm going to do here, still got the Kevlar poking through the ring. I'm going to move the ring forward a bit. And remember I said we could roughen things up here at this point. I'm just going to take my sandpaper, just basically make some rough spots here. It doesn't even have to be contiguous. Alright, and then we're going to put epoxy on there. All the way around. Alright, now I'm going to push the centering ring down through that, find the notch once more, and now I'm going to take the Kevlar here and I'm going to embed that in the epoxy. Alright, and now I've got the ring where you can just see the engine clip there. Alright, and then as needed we can put more epoxy around here. Now we want to keep it away from the most of the motor mount there, because lumps of epoxy could interfere with the fin tabs later on. So we want to keep this out of the way as much as we can. Alright, now I'm just going to put a temporary piece of masking tape on here just to hold things down and in place while that epoxy hardens. The epoxy has set on the forward ring there. I've taken the masking tape off. The Kevlar creeped down a little bit, so I'm going to come back to this. Alright, and kind of re-measure things a little bit, because the fin tabs are going to have to clear the Kevlar. So I'm going to put my aft ring on here, just sliding it up. Alright, so originally we had it there, and that's going to be too narrow, so I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Compare that now to the Kevlar side, and that looks pretty good there. So I'm just going to make myself a new mark here right where the ring is. Okay, I'm going to back that off just a bit, and then we'll make up another small batch of epoxy here. Alright, now I'm just going to put this on right in front of the centering ring, but behind my line. Alright, I'm just going to scoot that forward until I get back to my line again. Okay, make sure that's perpendicular all the way around. Okay, and then since I still have some epoxy left here, I'm going to put in the thrust ring now. Here I'll just put some epoxy around the whole ring. Okay, and then this is going to slide in the forward end of the motor mount and come to rest on the engine clip there. Okay, and then we're just going to let that whole thing cure for 10 to 15 minutes here. While I'm waiting for epoxy to cure, I can go ahead and start work on the nose cone. This is basically the same nose cone that you'd find on an Alpha. It's really close if it's not identical. Alright, and we do need to take out this little bit of flash, this plastic left over from the molding process here, so just gently cut that out without cutting the actual eyelet and without cutting your fingers. There we go. Okay, now this is molded in two halves, so it's got two seams along it here. And we've got a few things that we can do about that. One is you can simply ignore it. Two, you can do some sanding on it. I would use 220 grit sandpaper for this. So first of all, just sand the seams. Okay, now that has knocked down most of the ridges, but there is still a bit of a valley there. Okay, so you can either continue sanding this, and that may do enough for you. If you still have a valley there and you don't like it, you can fill that in with some plastic model contour putty. I think though that it's going to be small enough that between sanding and the primer I'll be using, it should fill that in fairly nicely. So now I'm just going to go ahead and continue sanding all the way around the nose cone so that it has a uniform finish, and that will also help the paint to bind to it. Alright, when you get that sanded to your liking, then just take a tissue or a rag or paper towel. You can moisten that either with some alcohol or some water and just wipe off the sanding dust so it does not get in the way of your paint and primer. Alright, and then I'm going to take this off camera while we're waiting for other things and start the priming and painting process on this. Something else we can do while we're waiting for the epoxy is to assemble the parachute. Now this isn't going to take much, and if you're planning on just tying this to the nose cone like typical model rockets have, I would just wait till the end for that part. But if you've seen my other videos, you know that I don't like to tie it to the nose cone. I prefer to use a snap swivel. And so I've got a snap swivel here, and the size really doesn't matter as long as you can fit things through it. So the swivel side loop there has to be big enough to hold the shroud lines, which this has fairly thick shroud lines, and it's part of the reason I'm using a fairly big one here. And then the snap portion has to be big enough to go around the eyelet of the nose cone. So here I'm going to start by holding the middle of the parachute in one hand, all right, and then all of the shroud line loops in the other. And here I can just adjust it back and forth a little bit until I get all of the corners into roughly the same spot there. Alright, now I'm going to hold on to that so it doesn't slip. And I'm going to bunch the loops down so that I can thread them through the swivel side eyelet here. Alright, I'm still holding them in the back so nothing slips. And I'm going to open those loops once more and then pass the entire snap swivel through them, pull the loops downward, and then pull that tight against the eyelet of the swivel side. Alright, now notice as soon as I lost tension on that, the knot tends to come apart. Alright, I'm going to recheck this. If it's moved and this isn't where you want it, then go ahead and loosen up this knot here and try again. Once you have it where you do want it, then take a small dab of white glue or wood glue and apply that to the knot. And this will just help keep it from coming undone, as it is easily seen it's trying to do. Alright, don't use super glue or epoxy for this. Super glue can negatively affect the nylon, and the epoxy is just too big of a mess. Okay, so just like that, and then we can just let that set aside to dry, and when our rocket is done and we're ready to attach the chute, then this can be clipped on either to the nose cone or to a loop in the shock cord. The epoxy is cured enough that we can work with this now, and so I'm going to take the shock cord here and I'm going to thread it back down through the forward end and out the aft end, and just pull that all the way through, and that will help keep it out of the way while we're mounting the engine, holder there. Alright, so now I'm just going to do a dry fit first of all. Alright, we're hanging up a little bit there on the edge of the shock cord, so I'm just going to take my hobby knife here and trim that down. Alright, and that'll work there. Okay. It feels like, oh, I've got a little blob of epoxy right here. So go ahead and, oh, probably shouldn't do that toward my thumb. Okay, so what this is going to mean here, because of the extra room, we're going to push this forward a little bit. Alright, so that you can, hopefully you can see that in the video. The aft ring is there, the forward ring is up here with the shot cord right behind it. Okay, so look in each of those fin slots and make sure nothing's going to interfere. And now we're going to make up some more epoxy, either 5 or 15 is going to be the best. If you got 30 and you want to use that, that's fine too. It's just going to take longer. I'm going to go ahead and use 5. Now, one of the nice things about the fiberglass here that you don't get with cardboard tubes is you can see exactly where you're putting your glue inside there. So we get a nice blob there. I get it just past the slots. And so as I push the motor mount in, it's going to push the epoxy ahead of it and form its own fillet there. Okay. I'm going to break that head off here so I can continue using the stick. Alright, so I'm going to push this in, but not into the epoxy yet. And when I get it in all the way, I want my engine clip to be in line with my launch lug line there. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is put some epoxy right on this inside edge of the aft end, and try and be careful not to get epoxy on the motor mount. It won't hurt the motor mount as such, but you may end up with a blob of epoxy right underneath a fin tab, and that can affect how the fins set in. So you just kind of keep tilting this around. Keep pulling this too close to myself. Alright. That could potentially become a blob in the way. Alright, so now I'm just going to take the whole thing, align with my line on the launch lug line. So we've got the line, the launch lug, and the engine clip all lined up. Okay, and then I'm just going to push this in just until the edge of that centering ring reaches the slots. Okay, and now we'll let that cure for a while. The epoxy on the motor mount has set up enough that we can continue working. And so next we're going to attach the fins. And we're going to do this in 2 stages. So I prefer to use some gel type super glue to tack these into place initially. And then after the glue is dried, the real strength comes from epoxy fillets that we'll put on the outside here. Now, if you want, you can use 5-minute epoxy to do the initial gluing as well, but I found the super glue usually dries faster and is still sufficient to hold it in place before the fillets go in. So here, much like you would do on a balsa fin, we don't want a lot of glue. We just want a thin film here initially, all along the root edge. Okay, and then that is simply going to go right in there. Oop, I got that backwards. Turn it around. Okay, so this is the long edge here is the leading edge. Alright, so we're going to put that in. Alright, and the slot will keep it aligned lengthwise. So all we have to do is make sure that it stays perpendicular to the tube. Alright, let that dry for about 5 minutes and then go on to each of the other 2 fins, and I'm going to do that part off camera. The super glue has dried inside, and so now I'm going to pass the shock cord back up through here so that it's not in the way when we're doing fillets. I'll pull that all the way through, and then up top here I'm just going to wind this up and then put it back in the tube so it's out of the way. Put a couple of tissues in the top so it doesn't come falling out at an inopportune moment. Something else I'm going to do while I have this right here is I'm going to take some super glue, just the regular viscosity here. I'm going to run it right along the edge here because there's some little tiny fibers of fiberglass, and I don't want these in my finger when I'm launching. Okay, and now I'm just going to immediately take and wipe that back around, get rid of the excess. I'm getting ready to apply the fillets, and so the first thing I've done here is masked off the bases of the fins so that I'm leaving about 3 to 4 millimeters on either side of the fin and about the same amount here in front. On the aft end, I've masked off right up to the base of the fins there. If you want, you can drop this back and bring your fillets around. And now I need to do the same thing for the fins. So here, I'm just going to mask off about the same distance. Alright, so this is ready to have fillets applied to it, and I'm going to stop the video here for just a moment while I put on gloves and make up some epoxy. This time I'm using a bit more epoxy, more than will fit into one of the little way boats. This is 15-minute epoxy. You can use 30 as well. If you use 5, you're probably going to have to make up a new batch for every fin. And so this gives you some more working time. Also, we want to be able to remove our masking tape while the epoxy is still soft. And so this will give us more working time that way as well. The little cup I'm using here is actually called an epoxy cup, and you can buy these online. You can also just use little like bathroom paper cups too. Alright, so here I'm just going to dab epoxy into the cracks there and along the joint. You'll also need to have some rubbing alcohol handy for the next step in this process. Now, as long as you keep your rocket in a horizontal position, you can do all the fins at once here. The key is putting in just enough, but not so much that the epoxy is going to run and drip while you're trying to do the other fins. And definitely have something covering your work surface, because the epoxy likes to just stick and harden to lots of things. Now if you get epoxy somewhere that you don't want it, as long as it hasn't cured yet, you can remove it with rubbing alcohol. Once it cures, basically you have to either cut it off or sand it off. Alright, so I'm going to keep this over my paper towels here, and I'm going to wet my fingers of my gloves with some rubbing alcohol. And pull my gloves as tight as I can so I have a nice smooth finger surface. Okay, and now, kind of like what you would do with wood glue on a regular model rocket, I'm just going to smooth this with my finger. And you see I've actually got a bit too much epoxy there. It's trying to run. Okay. Make sure everything's in place. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and let this set up for just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to pull the masking tape off. Now since I have a little bit of epoxy left, I'm going to go ahead and attach the launch lug with it. So I'm going to come back up to my launch lug line there. I'm going to just briefly sand the launch lug there to roughen up its surface. And then apply a little of my epoxy here. We can put in epoxy fillets later, or you can do what I didn't do here, is when you put the fins on, go ahead and tack the launch lug into place with the super glue as well. Either one works. Okay, so I'm just going to sight down the rocket here. Make sure everything is in line. Okay, that looks pretty good. Alright, so now we'll let that cure. I'm going to handle this carefully. I'm going to start removing the masking tape. Alright, now if you have any epoxy where you don't want it here, like I got some on my finger and then transferred it there, go ahead and take a tissue or paper towel, moisten that with the alcohol, keep pumping my launch lug there. Alright, so now I'm going to go around here and look for smudges and things, so there's one there. Or you may have a place where it creeped underneath your masking tape. Alright, but overall it looks pretty good. I'm going to check the body tube. Make sure I didn't transfer anything where I don't want it. Okay, and so now I am just going to let that finish curing in a horizontal position. My fillets have cured, and on the launch lug I just made fillets using some plastic model contour putty, since the launch lug itself was glued on with epoxy. Epoxy fillets are kind of overkill here. So now I'm going to take this off camera, apply some primer and then some spray paint, and when I come back we'll put the decals on. The paint on my rocket is finished, and most of the rocket is just a basic black. And then my nose cone is fluorescent green. And so we have two things left to do. One is to attach all of the recovery system here. So remove my tissue that was keeping the paint out. The first thing we need to do is put on the parachute protector here, and we just simply run our Kevlar shock cord through that little hole and down, and then we're going to tie the Kevlar onto our nose cone at the eyelet. Okay. Double knot, 2 half hitches here. Okay, cinch that down. And then if you have more than about 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch there, go ahead and cut off the excess, but not all the way back to the knot. Okay, and then go ahead and add just a drop of super glue to the cut end there, and then also a drop right on the knot to lock that in place. Okay, now when we go to attach the parachute, you can either attach it to the eyelet like you would standard model rockets, but I like to actually tie a loop in the Kevlar here about 10 to 20 centimeters down. It's hard to do this with elastic cords, but relatively easy with Kevlar. Okay, and this one I'm not going to lock the knot into place, that way I can move it easily. But now I can tie my parachute into this loop. And the main advantage there is it allows the nose cone to hang down vertically underneath the chute instead of hanging out at a near horizontal angle that tends to happen when you have it tied directly to the eyelet there. And that can increase the winding of your parachute shroud lines as it comes down. Finally, we can attach the parachute here. And as noted before, I put a snap swivel on here to make this easier. Okay, and that just snaps in here, or you can snap it on to the nose cone, whichever you prefer. Alright, and then if we're getting ready for launch, we'll go ahead and scoot the parachute protector up toward our tie-in point there. Okay, and just first of all stuff the excess shock cord down inside. Alright, Kevlar is really not affected very much by ejection gases. Alright, then we're going to take our parachute here and fold it roughly into a triangle. And I'll take the shroud lines and pull them up, basically folding them in half. Alright, I'm going to fold the parachute around that and over once. Okay, so that now I'll put this into the chute protector and just kind of make a piston out of it. Like that. Okay, and then that can be put inside. And this should go in fairly easily. If it's not, refold things. But it should slide down in there pretty quickly. There we go. Alright, and then attach the nose cone. Okay, do a little shake test here. That nose cone should not come out, but it should come out relatively easily with just a little bit of tension on it. I am ready to apply the decals. And so here's our decal sheet. And again, you have to buy this separately from the rocket kit. So the Razer-50 here, that's going to go on a side here between two fins, as they show here, with the Mach1 logo down at right in between the fins. Now it does not show us where this stripe is going. You could either put it on the one of the, away from the, so you could turn around the body tube here, put it on another face, or you could make this into bands. Okay, so that's kind of up to you. They don't really tell us what we're going to do with it. Now these are vinyl decals, and so you can use this trick of wetting them with some water that just has a drop of detergent in it, dish detergent, and that will lubricate the decal and prevent the adhesive from sticking quite so readily until the water dries out. So I'm going to start first of all by cutting out the decals here. Now these are coated with it's almost a masking tape like material, and these are to hold the letters in place while you are fitting them. So don't remove that quite yet. And in fact, one of the things you may want to do here is to help them adhere to that front surface. Take your fingernail or just a smooth object and just give that some rubbing here. Make sure it's well attached. Okay, so I want this on a part of my rocket that does not have the launch lug on it. Okay, so here I'm going to peel off the backing carefully. Alright, so we want the lettering to stay on this front piece. So if it tries to peel away from it, back up and try again. Okay, and now I'm going to put this in my water. And now I can position this however I want to. So I need to leave room down around the fins for the Mach1 logo here. Okay. Looks like it's off just a little bit, and this is why it's nice to do this, is I can reposition this pretty freely if I need to. That looks pretty good. So once you've got it where you think you want it, go ahead and smooth that down. And I'm going to leave that there for just a moment while I cut out the Mach1 logo. Alright, and this is going to go down here between the fins. Let's see if I can get this in view. There we go. Alright, now the tricky part is going to be peeling off this top piece while leaving the letters down. It's being a bit more difficult than usual. Okay, but once they're down, you can go ahead and kind of squeegee them off. And you don't have to do the water method here. You can just do them dry. You pretty much got to make sure you get it right the first time. those are giving me a little bit of trouble, but it's not too bad there. And you can go back through these as you need to and press them back down. You may find bubbles occur as the water dries out and such. Alright, and then for the green stripe here, I think I'm going to use that to make a couple of bands. It'll be in much the same way, but I'm going to do this off camera. Here is the finished rocket. So I ended up using that band to make a little bit of a wrap up here near the nose cone, and then I put a couple of stripes on one of the fins here. Okay, so that's ready to launch. Hope you had fun building this. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.